I found a drawer full of plane tickets in my wife's desk. Behind every single one, there was a photo. It turned out her monthly business trips were a lie. For 50 years, she had been flying 2,000 miles across the country just to see him. She kept this up from the age of 25 to 75. Half a century of betrayal. To make matters worse, the daughter I raised for decades isn't even mine. She belongs to him, the love of her life. I laughed. I laughed until the tears wouldn't stop. For 50 years, I slaved away for this family. I even took on manual labor after retiring. I'm 75, and I'm still out there sweeping streets. I did it all so she could live like a queen. Now I realize she never deserved a single bit of my kindness. A drawer full of tickets made me freeze for a few seconds. They were arranged so neatly. It was clear the owner cherished them. I picked one up. It was from 50 years ago, a flight from Austin to Chicago. That was the year Helen and I got married. Back then, I had a stable job, and we were comfortable. But we weren't wealthy enough to justify flying. Flying wasn't common in those days, and tickets were incredibly expensive. What was she doing in Chicago? As the thought crossed my mind, I noticed something on the back of the ticket. A photo was taped there. It was taken in the dead of winter. A 25-year-old Helen was snuggled into the arms of a young man in a black leather coat. Both of them were beaming. They looked genuinely happy. I leaned against the desk, my breath hitching in my chest. I scrambled for my pills and swallowed two just to keep from collapsing. I went through the rest of the drawer. I don't know how long I sat there. The sun was up when I started, and it was pitch black by the time I reached the last one. The last ticket was from the middle of last month. The photo was taken at a famous landmark in Chicago. Same pose. Same smile. From 25 to 75. For 50 years, Helen's business trips were just excuses to see her first love, Silas. Every photo had a note written on the back. She wrote, "Today Silas took me to get that deep dish pizza he loves. I still hate it, but I'm so happy. Silas says he can't let me go. He wants us to be together, but I'm already married. I can't let go of Silas either. I told him I'm pregnant. It's his baby. I had a daughter. Silas and I have a child together. I'm so happy. Our daughter got married today. I told Silas we have a grandson now. 50 years with my Silas." I clutched my chest, nearly fainting. So the daughter I raised for decades belongs to someone else. My grandson belongs to someone else. Even the wife I loved for 50 years belongs to another man. I was nothing more than a name on a marriage certificate. Haha, what a joke. Tears blurred my vision as the ticket slipped from my fingers back into the drawer. A whole drawer of tickets, laughing at the pathetic excuse for a life I've lived. "Are you snooping in my desk?" Helen suddenly appeared at the door. She rushed over and slammed the drawer shut. She's 75, but she's still elegant. Her hair and clothes are always perfectly styled. People always said a ragged old man like me didn't deserve her. She was a beauty in her youth. She and Silas were a famous couple back then. She was the graceful socialite, and Silas was the refined heir to a wealthy family. They only broke up because Silas had to move to Chicago for his career. Her parents set us up on a blind date, and I was the lucky man who caught her. Or so I thought. "Caleb, what right do you have to touch my things? This is my privacy." She frowned, her voice dripping with anger. I stood there, stunned. My glasses were fogged with tears, making her face look like a blur. "You've been seeing Silas every month?" I gripped the back of the chair, my whole body trembling. She hesitated for a second, before shoving me hard. "You looked at all of them? My legs aren't what they used to be." That shove sent me crashing to the floor. A sharp pain shot through me, and I let out a cry. Helen looked down at me with nothing but disgust. "Look at you. You don't even have to speak for people to know you're uncultured and gross. It's no wonder you have no boundaries. Rummaging through my personal life like a stray dog. You aren't even worth a single hair on Silas's head. He's a gentleman. He respects me." Every word was a knife to my heart. The pain was unbearable. "My biggest regret is being with someone like you. If you hadn't had that stable job back then, I wouldn't have looked at you twice." She glared at me, her words ice cold. Usually we got along fine. She was never affectionate, but she was never cruel. Today, she finally revealed what was buried deep inside. She regretted every second of our 50 years together. But if she hated me that much, why didn't she just leave? "So you never loved me. You went behind my back to see him and lied about my own daughter." I stared at her. The 75-year-old woman began to merge with the memory of her at 25. On our first date, she wore a beautiful dress and red lipstick. She had said, "You have a stable job, and I'm not bad looking. We can make a marriage work." Helen's eyes flickered with a hint of panic. She gritted her teeth. "I don't know what you're talking about. Our daughter is yours. Yes, I saw Silas, but it was just to make up for our youth. We promised we'd travel the world together. We never did anything inappropriate. Stop slandering me. If I really wanted to be with him, you would have been out of the picture long ago." "But I read your notes, Helen. We've been married for 50 years. You've lied to me for 50 years. You made me raise another man's child. I could barely get the words out through the heartbreak. Slap. She suddenly struck me across the face. The wrinkles at the corners of her eyes twitched. Her clouded eyes were cold. Fine. So what if she's Silas's daughter? What are you going to do about it? She was right. I couldn't do much. I worked like a dog when I was young. I worked construction after retirement. Now at 75, I sweep streets for extra cash. Every penny went to them. Helen controlled all our savings. If I left her and our daughter now, I'd have nothing. I could barely walk on my own. And even if she wasn't mine, I had raised that girl from infancy. I couldn't imagine leaving her. I couldn't imagine leaving the woman I'd spent 50 years with. Helen knew that. That's why she was so bold. Sure enough, she immediately went for the throat. Caleb, look at yourself. What do you gain by fighting with me? You'll only make me hate you. Our daughter always listens to me. If I stop caring for you, she will too. You can't even take a bath or leave the house without help. At your age, you should learn to keep your mouth shut. We're the same age, but she's healthy. I have one foot in the grave. But I got this way because I broke my back to give them a good life. I ate scraps so they could have steak. Well, are you going to keep making a scene? Helen looked down at me like I was dirt. I tried to push myself up, but my arms gave out. Can you at least promise not to see him again? I whispered. If she stopped, maybe I could pretend I didn't know. No, she didn't even hesitate. Caleb, you're an old man. You should know that marriage and love are two different things. I married you for stability. That doesn't mean I love you. Silas is the only one I've ever loved. We belong together. If you won't let me see him, then my daughter and I are done with you. My heart sank into an abyss. 50 years of living together. I was there every time she got sick. When she was in her 50s, she was diagnosed with a serious illness. Our daughter and our relatives told me to give up. They said the treatment was too expensive. But I didn't. I stayed by her side every day. I took her to every specialist in the country. When she finally got better, the first thing she did was go to Chicago. I know that now because I saw the note on one of the photos. I survived. The first thing I wanted to see was Silas. I, the man who stayed by her side day and night, didn't even exist in her mind. Then go. I don't need either of you anymore. I forced the words out, my heart breaking. Fine. You said it. Don't come crying to us when you're rotting alone. Helen stormed out, leaving me in the empty room. It took everything I had to crawl back onto the bed. A photo of us hung on the wall. It was from our wedding day. I was so happy back then. Helen had smiled and said, "We're a family now." I thought she married me for love. Now I know I was just a paycheck. I called my daughter and asked her to come over. Helen said she wouldn't care, but I didn't believe it. We were always close. When she was in middle school, Helen wouldn't let her have a phone. I saved up for months to buy her one in secret. In college, when she spent all her money on her boyfriend, I'd slip her extra cash. She used to say, "Dad, you're the best father in the world." "Dad, Mom told me everything. Are you really fighting with her over Mr. Silas again?" My daughter's voice on the phone was full of irritation. "You're so old. Why are you acting jealous? Mr. Silas is just a family friend. But your mother has been seeing him for years. Do you have any idea?" I stopped. I couldn't tell her she wasn't mine. I didn't want to hurt her. But to my horror, she already knew. "I know what you're going to say," she snapped. "So what if Silas is my biological father? He's just a blood relation. You raised me. You're my legal father. So can you just drop it? Stop being so difficult. Mom made a mistake when she was young. Everyone makes mistakes. Besides, Silas is so good to her. He takes her on trips, buys her jewelry. It's natural they'd have a connection." I couldn't believe my ears. When she was in college, she was caught seeing two guys at once. I told her she couldn't do that. I told her loyalty mattered. She had nodded back then. I thought she understood. Now I realize she's exactly like her mother. I just want her to stop seeing him. She's my wife. That's where you're wrong. My daughter sounded angry now. Everyone is an individual. They have their own freedom. You can't use a marriage certificate to cage her. Forget it. You're too stubborn to understand. I'm busy with work. Don't call me again today. She hung up. I sat on the bed for a long time. My life felt like a tragic comedy. I gave everything and got nothing but a knife in the back. In 50 years, Helen messed up plenty of times. I always forgave her. Like the time she lost all our savings on a bad investment scheme. Everyone blamed her. I was the one who worked extra shifts to earn it back, and told her it was okay. I could forgive her mistakes. But I couldn't forgive her being cuckolded for 50 years. This time, there would be no forgiveness. I wanted a divorce. I grabbed my cane and headed toward the local government office to ask about the paperwork. On the way, I saw them. Helen, Silas, and my daughter were standing outside a high-end restaurant. Silas was a tall man from the north. Even with white hair, he looked fit and strong. Helen was wearing a beautiful dress, her hair pinned up with an expensive clip. She was clinging to his arm like she was his wife. Our daughter was standing next to them, laughing. My blood turned to ice. As they turned to enter the restaurant, I limped toward them as fast as I could. Silas noticed me first. "Caleb, old buddy." He sounded surprised. "Good God, what happened to you? You look ancient." "You're only 75, right? You look like you're 90. Helen looked at me with pure loathing. "Are you following me?" My daughter was furious. "Dad, this is too much. Mom has her own life. Stalking her is harassment." It's okay, Silas said with a smug glint in his eyes. "Caleb didn't have much of an education. He doesn't know any better. Caleb, why don't you join us for dinner? Though I don't know if your stomach can handle fancy French food." "I'm not hungry," I spat. The rage in my chest was finally bubbling over. "I'm not like you. I don't just swallow anything put in front of me." I glared at Silas. "Caleb, what's that supposed to mean?" "It means exactly what you think. You're the kind of man who preys on another man's wife. You have no standards at all." "Caleb," Helen screamed. "How dare you speak to Silas like that?" My daughter looked at me with disappointment. "Dad, I thought our talk on the phone made things clear. You're just a bitter old man." "I finally see why Mom hates being around you. You're suffocating." "Silas is different. He's an intellectual. He's easy to talk to. My kids can actually learn something from him." Hearing them tag team me was the final straw. 50 years. 50 long years. I thought we had a bond. I thought we were family. But they were ready to throw me under the bus for a man who had done nothing for them. They forgot that their comfortable life was built on my 50 years of labor. I gripped my cane. They didn't deserve my kindness. Not anymore. "Helen, I want a divorce." My voice was steady. Helen's eyes widened. She looked like I'd just slapped her. "What did you say?" "Caleb, you're actually asking me for a divorce?" My daughter scoffed. "Dad, you're 75. You have a daughter and grandkids. Who gets a divorce at your age? You should be grateful a woman like Mom stayed with you this long." "At my age? Everyone thinks that once you're old, you should just endure the misery. Why? No matter how old you are, you have the right to live for yourself. I want a divorce. Let's go to the office right now." I'd been a pushover for 50 years. Not today. Silas had a smirk on his face. He turned to Helen. "Maybe you should just do it. A man like this doesn't deserve you anyway. Come to Chicago with me. I'll give you the grand wedding we never had. I'll make up for all those lost years." I saw the look on Helen's face. She was tempted. She wanted her love and her freedom. She looked at me and curled her lip. "Fine. You asked for it. Let's get it over with." The divorce filing office was housed in an old limestone building that smelled of damp paper, floor wax, and decades of regret. Helen walked 2 steps ahead of me, her high heels clicking loudly on the terrazzo floor. Silas walked beside her, his arm chivalrously placed behind her waist, while my daughter, Chloe, followed behind, continuously checking her gold-plated wristwatch. I walked last, my iron-tipped cane making a dull thump-thump-thump with every stride. The clerk behind the glass partition was a tired-looking woman in her late 50s with reading glasses resting on the tip of her nose. She looked up over her spectacles at our group, the glamorous, silver-haired couple, the sharply dressed middle-aged daughter, and the stooped old man in a faded canvas work jacket with calloused, dirt-stained fingers. "Names?" the clerk asked, her voice flat. "Helen Miller and Caleb Miller," Helen said, crisp, clear, and without a second's hesitation. "Reason for dissolution?" "Irreconcilable differences," Silas interjected smoothly, leaning against the counter. "The marriage has been dead for decades, ma'am. They're simply formalizing the reality." The clerk gave Silas a slow, cool look. "Are you the legal counsel, sir?" "No," Silas smiled, raising his chin slightly. "I am the gentleman taking responsibility for Helen's future." "Then please step back behind the yellow line," the clerk said flatly. "Only the parties to the marriage may speak at the counter." Silas's smile stiffened, but he took half a step back, smoothing the lapels of his cashmere coat. Chloe scoffed under her breath, whispering just loud enough for me to hear, "Bureaucratic nonsense. As if Dad could even fill out the forms himself without help." The clerk handed 2 stacks of paper through the window. "Fill out the basic asset declaration and grounds for division. Once filed, there is a 30-day cooling-off period before the final hearing." "Asset division?" Helen frowned, her delicate brows knitting together. "There's no need for a complicated division. Caleb has no assets. I hold the family bank accounts, and the house is where I live. Caleb can simply sign the waiver, releasing all claims." I stood beside her, holding the black ballpoint pen. My right hand, gnarled by 50 years of hammering timber, laying brick, and gripping heavy street brooms, trembled slightly. The house. I spoke, my voice low and gravelly. Yes, the house, Helen said impatiently, lowering her voice so the clerk wouldn't hear her irritation. Caleb, don't be ridiculous. You can't maintain a 3-bedroom house. You can barely climb the front porch steps. Silas and I will be using the house when we're in town, and Chloe needs the property as collateral for her son's private school tuition next year. And what about me? I asked, looking her dead in the eye. Where do I sleep? You have your pension from the city, don't you? Chloe chimed in, stepping up beside her mother. And you still sweep the streets. You can rent a small room near the depot. It's closer to your work anyway. Why do you need a big house at your age? I looked at my daughter. I remembered when she was 6 years old, shivering with a high fever in the middle of a blizzard. The roads were blocked by ice and no taxis were running. I had wrapped her in my heavy wool coat, placed her on my back and walked 4 miles through knee-deep snow to the regional hospital. My feet had been so frostbitten that the doctors had to peel my socks off along with layers of skin. She didn't remember that blizzard. She only remembered that Silas took her to high-end Italian restaurants when she was 30. I am not signing a waiver, I said softly. Helen's face darkened. Caleb, don't make this ugly. If we go through formal division, you'll have to hire a lawyer. Do you even know what a lawyer costs? You'll spend every penny you have just to end up with nothing. Then I'll spend every penny, I said. I turned away from the counter, picked up my cane, and walked toward the heavy oak doors of the courthouse. Caleb, Helen called out behind me, her voice sharp with anger. If you walk out that door without signing, don't expect Chloe or me to handle your funeral. When you drop dead. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. The heavy doors groaned open, and I stepped out into the crisp autumn wind. The office of Vance and Associates sat on the second floor of a worn brick building near the old industrial docks. It wasn't a sleek law firm with glass walls and marble floors. It was a modest space filled with towering filing cabinets, the smell of dark roast coffee, and the constant clatter of mechanical keyboards. Sitting behind the oak desk was Marcus Vance, a 40-year-old man in a rolled-up white shirt and suspenders. When I walked in, Marcus stood up so fast his chair rolled back against the bookshelf. Uncle Caleb? Marcus gasped, hurrying around the desk to grab my arm, guiding me gently to a leather armchair. Good Lord, Uncle Caleb, what are you doing here? Why didn't you call me? I would have picked you up. Marcus was the son of my old construction crew mate, Arthur Vance. When Arthur died in a scaffolding accident 30 years ago, the company tried to pay out a pittance in compensation to his widow and 10-year-old Marcus. I had spent 6 months fighting the company's union reps, working extra double shifts to hire a proper investigator, until we secured a full settlement that paid for Arthur's mortgage and Marcus's law school tuition. Marcus, I rasped, leaning my cane against the armrest. I need a lawyer. Anything, Marcus said instantly, sitting across from me, his eyes sharp and attentive. Name it. Did someone hit your street sweeping cart? Is the city trying to cut your pension? No. I pulled a small, worn leather-bound notebook from my inner coat pocket and laid it on the desk. My wife, Helen. We're divorcing. Marcus blinked, taken aback. Divorcing? After 50 years. I opened the notebook. Inside were photocopies of the flight tickets, the dates, the bank account numbers Helen had used over the decades, and a certified copy of the medical receipts from when I had paid for her cancer treatments 20 years ago. For 30 minutes, I told Marcus everything. I told him about the drawer of plane tickets from Austin to Chicago. I told him about Silas. I told him about Chloe's real parentage. I told him about the shove that sent me to the floor, and the way they stood outside the French restaurant, calling me an uneducated dog. As I spoke, the warmth in Marcus's face slowly drained, replaced by an icy, razor-sharp fury that made him look remarkably like his father. 50 years, Marcus whispered, his pen hovering over his notepad. 50 years of systematic marital fraud and covert diversion of community assets. She says I have no rights to the house, I said quietly. She says I'm just a laborer, and she controls all the accounts. Marcus let out a dry, bitter laugh. He stood up, walked over to a metal cabinet, and pulled out a land registry database terminal. Uncle Caleb, do you remember 35 years ago when the city rezoned the Old West District? Marcus asked, tapping quickly on his keyboard. I remember, I nodded. I worked 12-hour shifts pouring concrete for those new foundations. Do you remember who bought the original deed to your residential lot before the house was even built? Marcus turned the screen toward me. On the screen was a digitized municipal property record from 1988. Owner of record, Caleb Thomas Miller. Purchase method, sole separate property / premarital savings and personal inheritance from Thomas Miller, father. She thinks she owns the house because her name is on the utility bills, Marcus said, his eyes gleaming with lethal legal precision. She thinks because you were quiet you were stupid. But legally, Uncle Caleb, that house is 70% your separate property. And as for the money she took from your joint accounts to fund her trips to Chicago to see this Silas. Marcus leaned over the desk, resting his palms on the wood. Under state family law, using marital funds to maintain an extramarital affair constitutes a waste of community assets. We can file a motion for full financial discovery. Every flight ticket, every hotel booking, every gift she bought him. With the money you earn sweeping streets and pouring concrete, she will have to pay back every single cent. I looked down at my hands. The dirt under my fingernails wouldn't come off no matter how hard I scrubbed, but for the first time in 50 years my spine felt straight. Marcus, I said softly, I don't want to destroy her. I just want what I earned. And I want my name back. Uncle Caleb, Marcus said, placing a heavy, warm hand on my shoulder. You gave them 50 years of grace. Now let me give them the law. 2 weeks later, the notice of court-mandated financial audit arrived at the house. Helen was sitting in her sunroom, drinking Earl Grey tea from a bone china cup that Silas had sent her from Chicago, when the process server knocked on the front door. Chloe opened it, took the thick blue envelope, and lazily brought it into the sunroom. What is it? Helen asked smoothly, taking a delicate sip of tea. Is it Caleb's surrender agreement? Chloe opened the envelope, her eyes skimming the first page. A second later, her hands began to shake. Mom. Chloe's voice cracked. This isn't a waiver. What do you mean? It's a subpoena from the district family court, Chloe said, her voice rising. In panic. It's a motion for emergency freezing of all marital accounts, an order for a full forensic audit of your bank records from 1974 to the present, and an eviction notice. Helen dropped her teacup. The fine china shattered against the hardwood floor, spilling dark tea across her spotless white rug. An eviction notice? Helen shrieked, standing up so fast her chair tipped over. In my house. It says here. Chloe's face was turning white as she read the legal text. It says the residential property at 412 Maple Street was purchased using Dad's, I mean Caleb's, personal inheritance from his father in 1988. The deed is registered solely under his name. The court has granted him temporary exclusive occupancy pending trial due to his physical disability and age. Nonsense. Helen's chest heaved with rage. I lived here for 35 years. I decorated this place. Silas stayed here 3 years ago when he visited. How can a street sweeper evict me? She pulled out her phone and frantically dialed Silas's number. It took 4 rings before Silas answered. His voice sounded distant, accompanied by the background hum of an airport terminal. Silas. Silas, darling. Helen wailed into the receiver. You need to call your lawyers in Chicago right now. That old brute Caleb hired some cheap neighborhood attorney and froze my bank accounts. He's trying to kick me out of the house. Silence stretched over the line. Silas? Helen asked, her voice faltering slightly. Are you there? Helen, Silas's voice came through, but it didn't sound like the suave, poetic gentleman from the French restaurant. It sounded cold, sharp, and distinctly irritated. What do you mean he froze the accounts? How much money was in that account? About $80,000, Helen stammered. The money from Caleb's pension and his extra shifts. 80,000. Silas scoffed loudly. Helen, you told me Caleb had accumulated significant property equity and a substantial municipal death benefit. You told me he was holding over 300,000 in savings. Well, he did. But the medical bills from 20 years ago. Helen stuttered, her hand trembling against the phone. And I spent some on our trips to Chicago. So you don't have the liquid capital to cover the retainer for my corporate restructuring loan. Silas cut her off sharply. Helen froze. Your loan? Silas, what are you talking about? In the background, an airport loudspeaker chimed. Final boarding call for Flight 402 to Miami. Silas. Helen's voice turned high and terrified. Where are you? Why are you at the airport? Helen, listen to me, Silas said, his tone entirely businesslike, devoid of any 50-year romance. My firm in Chicago is facing an unexpected SEC inquiry. I came back to Austin to secure temporary liquidity through you, assuming your divorce settlement would yield at least $200,000. If you have no cash, and you're being evicted from the property, I cannot afford to be involved in your local legal disputes. Silas. Helen screamed, tears springing to her eyes. We've loved each other for 50 years. You said we were going to travel the world. You said we were getting married in Chicago. 50 years ago we were 25, Helen, Silas said flatly. We're 75 now. I have 3 ex-wives, 2 lawsuits in Illinois, and a tax lien on my condo. I don't need a penniless 75-year-old woman dragging me into court. Call me when your lawyer recovers some actual cash. The line went dead. Helen stood in the middle of her sunroom, the phone slipping from her fingers, bouncing off the ruined rug. Chloe stared at her mother, her mouth agape. Mom, did Mr. Silas just hang up on you? Helen didn't answer. She looked around the sunroom, the room she had decorated with mid-century furniture bought with Caleb's double-shift overtime pay, the room where she had written notes on the back of plane tickets describing her true love. The room was silent. Silas was gone. The money was frozen. And the door opened. Marcus Vance stepped into the foyer, accompanied by 2 deputy sheriffs. Mrs. Miller, Marcus said politely, holding up a certified court order. You have 2 hours to pack your personal clothing and vacate the premises. Mr. Caleb Miller will be returning to his home at 4 o'clock. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, a yellow city taxi pulled up to the curb of 412 Maple Street. I stepped out, holding my cane. I wasn't wearing my faded work jacket anymore. Marcus had bought me a simple, well-fitted dark blue wool coat and a clean pair of leather shoes. My hair was neatly combed, and for the first time in 10 years, I wasn't carrying a heavy street broom. On the front lawn, 3 large cardboard boxes were stacked near the driveway. Helen and Chloe were standing by Chloe's small sedan. Helen looked like she had aged 10 years in 3 hours. Her immaculate hair was disheveled, her silk blouse wrinkled, and her eyes red and swollen. When she saw me walk up the driveway, she took a frantic step forward. Caleb, she cried out, her voice broken, reaching out her hands toward me. Caleb, please. It was a misunderstanding. Silas. Silas lied to me. He was using me. He took my money. I stopped 10 feet away from her, leaning on my cane. He didn't take your money, Helen, I said softly. He took my money. The money I earned standing in the freezing rain while you slept in a warm bed. Caleb, I'm your wife. Helen sobbed, dropping to her knees right there on the damp grass of the front lawn. 50 years. We've been together for 50 years. You can't be this heartless. Where am I supposed to go? Go to Chicago, I said. Helen flinched as if I had struck her. He left for Miami. He blocked my number. Then go to a hotel, I replied flatly. You spent 50 years telling me that marriage was just a transaction for stability. Well, Helen, the transaction is canceled. Chloe stepped forward, her face flushed with fury and embarrassment. Dad, how can you do this to Mom? She's an old woman. If she stays in a motel, her health will fail. I turned my head and looked at Chloe. Don't call me Dad, I said. Chloe froze. The anger on her face turned into a sudden, icy shock. What? What did you say? Chloe whispered. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out a white envelope, and handed it to her. It was the official court-ordered paternity report that Marcus had filed yesterday morning. Probability of paternity between Caleb T. Miller and Chloe Miller, 0%. Chloe looked at the bold red text on the bottom of the page. Her hand shook so violently the paper rattled in the wind. You knew? Chloe choked out, looking at me with wide, terrified eyes. I knew 2 weeks ago, I said calmly. I spent 30 years buying you phones, paying your tuition, slipping you extra cash when you spent your money on boyfriends, and listening to you tell me that I was an uneducated embarrassment. I treated you like my daughter because I believed love was built on presents, not blood. I took a slow, deep breath, looking up at the sky. But you told me on the phone that loyalty doesn't matter. I continued looking back at her. You told me that everyone is an individual and has their own freedom. So today, Chloe, I am exercising my freedom to no longer be your father. Chloe's lips parted, but no sound came out. A single tear slipped down her cheek, but it wasn't the tear of a grieving daughter. It was the terror of a parasite realizing its host had walked away. Pack your boxes, I said quietly, and get off my land. I walked past them, stepped onto the porch, and inserted my key into the heavy front door. Behind me, Helen began to scream and cry, pounding her fists against the hood of Chloe's car, while Chloe stood motionless in the driveway clutching the paternity report in the cold wind. I stepped inside, closed the door and locked it. The final divorce hearing took place 2 months later in the state family court. The courtroom was quiet. Helen sat at the defense table beside a public defender, provided by the state. She could no longer afford a private attorney after the court froze her accounts. Her face was gaunt, her skin gray, her former socialite elegance completely stripped away. Silas didn't show up. He had sent a written deposition through a process server in Florida, officially denying any financial or romantic cohabitation with Helen, to avoid being named as a co-defendant in the civil waste lawsuit. In his statement, he described Helen as a former high school acquaintance who frequently sought unwanted contact. When the clerk read Silas's deposition aloud in court, Helen sat motionless, staring at the polished wood of the table, two quiet tears rolling down her wrinkled cheeks. My attorney, Marcus Vance, presented the financial audit to the judge. 50 years of bank statements, 142 plane tickets, 48 hotel receipts, $320,000 in marital funds spent on flights, gourmet meals, and gifts for Silas, all while I worked construction double shifts and swept city streets for $20 an hour. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, looked over the evidence, then turned her cold gaze toward Helen. Mrs. Miller, the judge said, her voice echoing in the quiet courtroom. In my 30 years on the bench, I have rarely seen a case of such profound, prolonged deceit. You utilized the claimant's physical labor and sacrifices to maintain an extramarital life, while actively denying him financial security and basic human dignity. The judge struck her gavel. Findings of the court. 1. The marriage between Caleb Thomas Miller and Helen Miller is officially dissolved. 2. The residential property at 412 Maple Street is declared 100% the separate property of Caleb Thomas Miller. 3. Respondent Helen Miller is ordered to forfeit all claims to Caleb Thomas Miller's municipal pension. 4. Respondent Helen Miller is ordered to pay a restitution judgment of $180,000 to the petitioner for the waste of community assets, to be satisfied through the liquidation of her personal jewelry, private savings, and future social security garnishments. When the gavel struck the sounding block, Helen collapsed forward onto the table, sobbing hysterically. Chloe, sitting in the public gallery behind her, tried to reach out to comfort her mother, but her own face was pale and hollow. Without Caleb's financial backing, Chloe's husband had filed for separation, and her son had been pulled from his elite private school due to unpaid tuition. I stood up from the petitioner's table. I didn't look at Helen. I didn't look at Chloe. I turned to Marcus, shook his hand firmly, and said, "Thank you, son." "Anytime, Uncle Caleb." Marcus smiled warmly. "Let's go home." 12. A sunset worth living. Spring arrived in Austin 6 months later. The air smelled of blooming bluebonnets, fresh rain, and green cedar. I sat on the wooden porch swing of 412 Maple Street, holding a warm cup of black coffee. The porch had been freshly painted white, the lawn was manicured, and a small garden of red roses, flowers I had always wanted to plant but Helen had banned because she thought they were common, were blooming vibrant and bright. Along the fence line, my cane rested against the armrest of the swing. My legs still ached when the weather changed, but the deep, suffocating tightness in my chest was gone. A blue city utility truck pulled up to the curb. 3 men in orange work vests stepped out, carrying a large gift basket filled with fresh fruit, roasted nuts, and a fine bottle of bourbon. It was my old street sweeping crew. "Hey, old Caleb," the crew leader, a burly 30-year-old named Big Mike, called out, leaning over the fence with a huge grin. "How's retirement treating you old fox?" "It's quiet, Mike," I chuckled, putting down my coffee and waving them up to the porch. "Come on up. There's cold iced tea in the kitchen." The 3 young men stomped their boots clean and sat on the porch steps, laughing, sharing stories about the city routes, complaining about the new supervisor, and asking my advice on how to repair the hydraulic brushes on the old street sweepers. They didn't look at me as an uneducated dog. They looked at me as the master worker who had taught them the job, the man who had shared his lunch with them when they were broke, the man who had earned his rest. As we sat there laughing under the afternoon sun, I saw a distant figure walking slowly down the sidewalk. It was Helen. She was wearing a cheap, faded cotton dress, carrying a plastic grocery bag filled with discount vegetables. She lived in a small, damp basement apartment 3 miles away, working part-time as a cleaner at a local laundromat to pay off her court restitution judgment. She stopped near the edge of my fence, looking over at the pristine porch, the blooming red roses, and the loud, happy laughter of the young workers surrounding me. Our eyes met across the yard. There was no rage in my heart anymore. No bitterness. No pain. I looked at her the same way I looked at a stranger passing by on the street, with quiet, absolute indifference. I raised my coffee cup toward her in a silent, polite gesture, then turned back to Big Mike to answer his question about the hydraulic line. Helen stood by the fence for a long moment, tears spilling down her withered, unadorned cheeks, before she turned around and shuffled slowly away into the shadow of the street, clutching her plastic bag. I took a sip of my warm coffee, leaned back against the porch swing, and closed my eyes, listening to the birds singing in the red rose bushes. I was 76 years old, and for the very first time in my life, I was finally home.